been on the market for many years, since the late 1800s, and the German company IG Farben Bayer Corporation sold heroin for a long time. It didn't have any control. At one time, it was thought that heroin is actually a cure for the opium habit. Probably not a good idea. It comes in lots of colors and flavors. White, powder, black tar, and brown. Classically, if you read some literature, would say that black tar heroin was a western form of heroin, west of the Mississippi, sort of the west coast, and that white heroin and some of the brown versions here was more of an eastern heroin. And I haven't found that to be true. I'm not talking about personal use. I'm talking about patient descriptions. When I came out of the National Heroin, I was in the Community Health Center organization, developing an addiction services program, and many patients that we were following, IV heroin users, will tell you they could get any type, any color, any time. That was in Middle Tennessee. So it's really not a geographic limit. This is called China White, most commonly. Black tar. Black tar heroin is not more potent. As a matter of fact, you don't know if any of these are more potent. They're cut so many times and so many additives. It's hard to say what's truly the most potent. Black tar heroin has been famous for some of the worst soft tissue infections from IV injection. Even botulinum exposure and infection from black tar heroin. That doesn't look too sterile. Quality control among drug sellers is not that high on the list. This is a spoon. They commonly call a cooker. You can cook a heroin in any sort. You can dissolve it in water. You can heat it up, get it to a form you can inject it. Put a needle through a Q-tip, end of a Q-tip swab, so it's somewhat as sterile as you want to get it, and you can inject it. You can also snort this. Some people don't revert to IV injection. Many do eventually. They've been on it for a while to get the most high from that. Now, before there was any controls, as I said, you could buy heroin without any controls for some years. There were a lot of patent medicines on the market. You didn't even have to tell your customers what they were getting. You just had to have a claim to fame of what you could cure. I like this one, Dr. Buckland's Scotch Oats Essence. It's for sleeplessness, nervous debility, paralysis, sciatica, epilepsy, neuralgia. It's nature's nerve and brain food. I don't know why we still don't have it. We have a lot of those problems still here today. The Keeley cure. I don't know if anyone's heard of the Keeley cure. Actually, the Keeley Institutes were quite widespread. As a matter of fact, this was our Florida Keeley Institute. This was in Jacksonville. This was in Jacksonville. The Keeley cure. They had cures for drunkenness, opium, morphine, and other drug-using habits. It was for liquor and drug using. It was a scientific remedy. Most states had a Keeley Institute. This was late 1800s up into the early 1900s. You could go for the cure. I don't know why we still don't have them either, because it says they had over 400,000 cured. It turns out that Dr. Buckland's Scotch Oats Essence and many other patent medicines, and the Keeley cures, they had a bottle that you could buy even on the market for one for alcohol, one for opium, one for cocaine. It turns out that the cure contained the item you were trying to be cured from. Dr. Buckland's Scotch Oats Essence actually contained morphine, alcohol, and cannabis. So, I suspect it worked on some of these items. I don't know about the paralysis, but I suspect people felt a little better when you took morphine, alcohol, and cannabis. Well, that didn't last. After a few years, we got smart in our country, and in 1906, there was a Pure Food and Drug Act. And they did not demand for you to stop selling items to the public. They just said, this act just basically said, you must put the label on of what's included. So they did. So this was really the beginning of involvement by the government in drug manufacturing. But you could keep selling those. Now, by the 1914, and this is still preceding the prohibition of alcohol still, but they put a taxation. Even as physicians, you could still prescribe opiates and cocaine. But you had to have a special stamp and tax which had to be paid. What this act, however, did do is that this law was interpreted quite strictly, that physicians could not maintain someone that was addicted to a substance. on that. So if you're prescribing opiates and cocaine, you had to let them know and pay your tax. If you were trying to maintain someone that was called addict on a substance, that was illegal. As a matter of fact, about 3,000 doctors served jail time, about 20,000 paid fines. Addicts and doctors were all of a sudden arrested. So all of a sudden the addict was a criminal. It wasn't a medical problem anymore. That was a criminal act. This really changed the perception among physicians, among society in general, that a substance dependence was really not just a medical problem. By 1929, it was the federal prison officials, not the public health, that said we have a problem here. The prison officials said most of what's in our federal prisons is a drug problem, especially heroin addiction. We need to do something about that. And so the Porter Act of 1929 established 2 narcotic farms in the country. One was in Lexington, Kentucky. The other one was in Fort Worth, Texas. The one in Lexington opened in 1935, the other one in 1938. The one in Lexington, that's actually about 6 miles from where I went to medical school. That building is still there. It closed as a narcotic facility, treatment facility in 1975. But that facility is still there. It's still part of the federal prison system. And it's now a federal medical hospital. They did great things at these narcotic farms, or U.S. Public Health Service farms they became. They did great things, great comprehensive care. They had recreation, bowling alleys, golf, croquet, they had art classes, music classes. Heroin was such a big problem at the time that a large part of jazz musicians in that age were heroin dependent. Many of them spent time at the Lexington Narcotic Farm. They said the best place for jazz music in the United States was in Lexington as a narcotic farm because they had a concert hall bigger than this room. They did everything well, and the patients did so well. So they left. And the relapse rate was around 96%. Well, we're talking about opiates. We'll be talking about other drugs. But those are not just the major problem. They are a major problem, but we can't forget that there's other substance use that causes a tremendous amount of morbidity and mortality. Tobacco and alcohol. And around the world, if you look at tobacco alone, over 6 million people will die this year, in each year, from a condition-related tobacco use. In the United States, about 480,000, and in Florida, over 32,000 people will die each year with a condition that is certainly either caused by or made worse by tobacco. Alcohol is way up there too, 3.3 million in the world, 88,000 related deaths in the U.S., and in Florida around 6,700 in the last year, based on CDC data that were related to alcohol. So we always have to keep those in mind as clinicians, that the significance of problems with tobacco and alcohol use. Although opiates is the focus now, and it hits the news a lot, these are major problems. Now, they also follow what we call diseases or deaths of despair. And so you say, what is that? Well, alcohol, drugs, and suicide. Not only have the opioid overdose or drug overdose rates been increasing significantly, but deaths from suicide have been increasing in a corresponding way. As a matter of fact, every state, for some reason Nevada did not, but every state had an increase in their suicide rate between 1999 and 2016. Florida's rate, we fall in the category of 6 to 18%. That actually, I think that number was I believe it's 13% rise of suicides in that period of time. Well, they call them diseases and deaths of despair is because it seems to follow people who have lost hope. And there's often correlation, as we'll talk towards the end of this, about some of the socioeconomic, social determinants of health factors around what leads to that, what leads to drug use, alcohol use, and what we call despair and eventual suicide use. Now, the U.S. has seen a drop in life expectancy. I think it's now for 2 consecutive years, a slight drop in life expectancy. Now, that's not sort of equal across all parts of our population by any means. Ann Case and Angus Deaton, Angus Deaton was a Nobel Prize-winning economist, but they published a couple of papers here that talked about a specific group of the U.S. population, that the death rates, look at other developed countries like France, Germany, Canada, Sweden, death rates per 100,000 in this age group, 45 to 54, had been declining and continues to decline. Even in the U.S., the death rates among U.S. Hispanics has declined in that same period, 1999 through 2013. What we are seeing, though, that in the U.S. among non-Hispanic whites, the death rate has not declined, but has actually begun to increase. We've even seen that more so in the last couple of years. Why is that? If you take that group, the non-Hispanic white Americans, by group, what are they dying from at an increasing rate? Poisoning. Well, they use poisoning related to all drug-related overdoses, okay? Poisoning has been on the rise, or overdoses. Suicide has been on the rise in that group. Liver diseases and cirrhosis, predominantly driven by alcohol and somewhat driven by hepatitis C. If you've taken the opioid required training for the state, some of the courses that they offer, they march out every year the development of the overdose death rate as it's expanded and worsened since 1999 up through, this was through 2015. But this, I just took the first one and the last one out from 2015, these red zones. You know, we talk a lot about the blue zones, about increased life expectancy. Well, an opposite problem would be that there's actually the red zones. And these are the areas with the highest opioid or highest overdose death rates and opioid overdose death rates as well. Florida has, these are all counties. Florida has certainly several red zone counties. Appalachian region, of course, Eastern Kentucky, East Tennessee, West Virginia, all of this area, highly affected. You get out into Arizona, New Mexico. Again, the number of red counties that have had increased overdose rates during this time period has continued to grow. Now, we talk a lot about overdose deaths. It gets the press a great deal. And it's like, wow, it's substantial, especially if you know people. Like I know people, and you probably know people. It might be within your family, it may be friends, it may be colleagues, it may be in other extended groups that you know, that when you put a name on a death that's overdose related, and you think that for every one prescription or illicit opioid overdose death, this is in 2015 data, there's at least 18 people who had a substance use disorder involving heroin, another 62 who have a substance use disorder involving prescription opioids, and so on down. Those who misuse prescription opioids, and then a large population for each one death, nearly 3,000 who are on prescription opioids. This, with some of the new laws, new regulations in place, you know, what has happened is that some, as the supply side has been ratcheted down, someone with a true addiction at that point, it's not a matter of, oh well, can't get that drug, I'll just stop, my life will go on. You don't do that. You can't do that, really. You move on up, and you get what you can get. You can either then buy your meds off the street, or you can move to heroin. Both which are quite deadly. Now, we've seen three waves of opioid overdose deaths. There's really three patterns that we've seen develop. If you look at around the late 90s and the 2000s, there was the beginning of a rise in the prescription opioid overdose deaths. Okay, this is that time period, you know, you hear a lot about. Pain is the fifth vital sign. Increased marketing from some pharmaceutical companies that would say, you know, this is safe, it's really not as addictive as you've been told. You know, you just need to prescribe. People need to be comfortable, right? We're here to serve people, patients. So there's an increased number of prescribed opioids on the market, and correspondingly, there's an increased rate of deaths from overdose. By the time you get 2010 range, what we're starting to see is this second rise in heroin overdose deaths. Well, why is that? Well, this time period, actually, if you go back to around 2007 and on up into 2010, 2011, this is a time that most of the states were really getting serious about recognizing this rise in prescribed opioid use and overdose deaths. So most states by then were beginning to put into place what? The prescription drug monitoring programs. Check the database. There was some tamper-resistant, Oxycontin coming out. There was just a lot of even state regulatory changes for the medical licensure that said, hey, we've got a problem here. So what we saw, and we'll see on a couple of graphs coming up, the prescribed opioid overdose deaths began to level off and somewhat decline, but the switch was over to heroin. Heroin was readily available, So that was the second wave. What we're seeing right now, and it really started about 3 or 4 years ago, but it's still a very, very serious and predominant thing now. We're seeing a rise in synthetic opioid overdose deaths. That's fentanyl. That's what you see now predominantly. Fentanyl and analog fentanyl that are what we call causing this third rise in overdose death rates. Now, JAMA last fall in October had a great article that began to show, they said that age-adjusted opioid-related overdose deaths by about 2010 were leveling off, maybe declining. Illicit opioid overdose deaths were going up. That's heroin, fentanyl. Past year heroin use among the age group greater than 12 had peaked out, actually had declined. This was through 2015. Per capita prescription of opioid sales began to decline around 2010. Well, we've got this kick, right? We've got this now. Things are looking good. Well, this is what's driving it. Fentanyl drug reports were climbing, and they continue to climb. We'll look at a few graphs here that come from the CDC. The CDC publishes provisional data. You get 2 lines from them. You get a dot and a solid line. This is what they are predicting, but they've only got confirmation on the solid line. So they're usually pretty close, and by the end of the year, they're pretty close. What we see, this is a 12-month window. So each point here, for instance, it reflects the overdose death in the preceding 12 months. It's not in that month, it's in the preceding 12 months. So if you look at CDC provisional data now that's available through December of 2017, 72,306 deaths in the preceding 12-month period. If you look at this last year, if I was giving this talk last year, this total overdose death number was around 64 to 65,000. So there's been about a 9.5 increase just in the last year. The CDC, now we don't have Florida's specific breakdown yet, but the CDC, the whole country, when you look at drug-specific overdose deaths, drug-specific overdose deaths that were opioid-related, this number was 49,000 opioid deaths. This was a 9.2% increase from the previous year. Now, this is what I want this graph for. Is that what's rising here? What's the brown line? It's synthetic opioids, not methadone though. Methadone has a cone line. It's down here. It's overdose deaths from it have been sort of flat, sort of stable. What's rising are the synthetics, primarily driven by fentanyl. Where is heroin and other semi-synthetic or prescribed opioids? It's right here. It's the green and blue line. They haven't increased at all. As a matter of fact, in that preceding 12-month period, there's been a slight decline. All the new regulations are working, right? But the problem hasn't changed. But this is driving it. What else is climbing? This is something that we're going to be. This will be a future grand round, I feel, because we know it's already on the rise. It's stimulant overdose deaths, cocaine and amphetamines, right here. This magenta line and gray line. They're already on the rise. We're seeing that in Florida substantially. The stimulant overdose-related deaths. Florida-specific data, again, they do not have the individual data. Probably won't have until the end of the year for Florida. But for the all-drug overdose death, 5,484 in the preceding 12-month period. If you look at the graph, yes, that is the rate in the last few months has shown a slight decline, but the 12-month period is still 8.5% higher than it was a year ago. Now, this goes back to this goes from 2009 through 2015. There's no test. Don't try to remember the numbers. I say only look at these graphs for trends. What are the trends for opioid-related deaths? Well, if you look at Florida overall, again, pay attention to the specific numbers, but look at the trend. Oxycodone, so prescribed opioid oxycodone, hit its peak around 2010 and had been on the decline. Slight increase in 2015 here. But what's really driving the numbers for the state are the blue, the red, and the green. What are they? Morphine, heroin, fentanyl. You can add the morphine and heroin lines together. Our medical examiner's office in the state will publish what the data shows. If it's morphine, that's what gets reported. It's not that we have too many prescriptions for morphine or just natural morphine on the market. Too much. That's all heroin. We said heroin is what? Diacetylmorphine. If you take it, it very quickly becomes morphine. It's deacetylated, you have morphine. So almost all that's recorded as a morphine death is heroin death. And fentanyl, of course, is in its own. So these 4 counties, Collier County, again, just look at the trends. If we were to, once they get through 2017 data out, you're going to see primarily this, that the morphine, heroin, fentanyl are going to be the predominant causes of opiate overdose deaths. Prescribed opioids are still up there, but they're not in that top 3. Neonatal abstinence syndrome. Most of us know what that is. An infant that's born to a mother that was on opioids throughout their pregnancy and up to the end of their pregnancy. What's it cost? Probably, most estimates would say that neonatal abstinence syndrome, a child born with that, costs around $65,000 to $70,000 to treat. Average stay in hospitals anywhere from about 5 to 25 days, somewhere in that range. It takes about $65,000 to $70,000 to treat a baby during that time, compared to a child that's born that may only be $5,000 if there was no NAS. So it's a substantial problem. It has also risen 54% from 2012 through 2016. So fentanyl, of course, we've heard of fentanyl for a long time, right? Patches and anesthesia has been using fentanyl and uses fentanyl today. Every day you use fentanyl for inpatient, outpatient surgeries. Very potent, of course. Fentanyl in itself, compared to morphine, is about, you hear various estimates, but 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. Certainly it's legal, but what we're talking about is the illicit fentanyl that's being manufactured, mostly in Asia, mostly in China. It's mixed and sold as heroin or with heroin, and it's found in multiple other street drugs. Now, what's the comparative potencies? Well, if you look at heroin, you know, I think when they published this, they said these were lethal doses, especially for someone who was opioid naive. 10 to 12 milligrams of heroin here could be a fatal dose. Fentanyl, a lethal dose, was closer to 1 to 2 milligrams. Carfentanil, so I hear that term some. There's fentanyl analogs. I think the science would say there's up to the 300 analogs that could be produced, but they haven't all been. But it seems like every week you hear of a new analog of fentanyl. Carfentanil is one of those. Compared to morphine, could be, they say, anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 times more potent than morphine. Carfentanil dose, this is a dime in comparison, what it would take to be lethal. Carfentanil is what's been known as the elephant tranquilizer. It was never meant for humans. It was used in large animal sedation. But it's out there now, and it's on the market too. We spent a lot of time on these. This is a graph. This comes from the Florida Medical Examiner's report through 2017. These are non-medical prescription opioids, not fentanyl, that were in decedents. So someone who had died who had a prescribed opioid in their system, but sort of the non-medical use. They weren't prescribed it, but they had a prescription form. This is total deaths up through 2017. When you add fentanyl in there, people who had non-prescribed opioids in their system when they died, they don't say that that was the cause of death. It was just in their system. But when you add fentanyl in, there's over 10,000. In Florida alone, this was through 2017. Now, here's what's scary, is that if you can't get a prescribed opioid anymore, or if you can't see a doctor to get a prescription, even that you once would, you can buy this on the street, right? Because everyone knows that the quality control amongst buying drugs on the street must be very good, must be equivalent, correct? Well, so this is 30 milligram oxycodone. It's the real deal. This is sold as oxycodone too. This is out of some DEA data, or pictures out of Portland, Oregon. These were all sold as oxycodone. And when they were analyzed, this one had alprazolam and U47,700. U47,700 is another synthetic opioid that doesn't really have another name yet. It's very potent, at least as potent as fentanyl. This one sold as oxycodone, had heroin, oxycodone, and pyranil fentanyl. And then this pill had all these items: tramadol, oxycodone, heroin, alprazolam, 47. So, if you want to buy something on the street, even Xanax, you hear this all the time in the drug bust, that they collected Xanax, or someone took Xanax, or they died from Xanax. But it turns out that you can manufacture just about any pill you want to look like anything you want, and it's very potent. If you put you mix it with heroin or fentanyl, it may not have any alprazolam in it at all. How do you do that? Well, you buy yourself a pill press. You can get this off of the dark web for under $1,000, and you can pay an extra couple of $100 to get the molds to make any shape, any lettering, the recipe to make it any color that you want. And for essentially pennies on the dollar, you can make lots of money by manufacturing your own pills. This goes on all the time. This is July 5th. Came out of the Tennessee, out of the TV station there in Tennessee. Drug bust leads to seizure of 24 pounds of fentanyl. This is right in Nashville. 24 pounds. Do the math. 24 pounds of fentanyl with its potency, as we stated earlier. If you convert that to kilograms and then into milligrams and then to what is a potentially lethal dose, especially in an opioid person, that at 24 pounds can be equivalent to 10 million lethal levels of fentanyl that are taken drugs. This is coming in all the time. We probably don't capture a small fraction of the amount of fentanyl that's coming in. It's hard to capture heroin. Boy, if you can get 24 pounds of fentanyl in, you're treating half the country. Well, where do our patients live? What are they taking? Most of my patients live right here in the center. Even if you send me someone that has an opioid dependence and they're interested in getting off of that or getting on medication-assisted treatment like buprenorphine, Suboxone, often the first visit, we find out, well, let's see, you had opioids in your system, yeah. Where did the cocaine come from? Because you have stimulants here, cocaine, methamphetamines, prescribed methylphenidates. You have other sedatives on board, benzodiazepines, commonly used in alcohol. Some people are using antigens like ecstasy, hallucinogens, mushrooms. So my patients live sort of here. They're using multiple substances. As a matter of fact, when we look at the death rate, when we look at the opioid overdose deaths, it's rarely cured, rarely one drug. This is something that's been out. I've seen been a lot of talk. Everyone uses this slide. It's very pertinent. It says people who are addicted, not someone who's a casual user of alcohol or marijuana, cocaine, but people who actually are dependent on alcohol are twice as likely to be addicted to heroin. If you're dependent on marijuana, you're 3 times as likely. Cocaine, 15 times as likely. If you're dependent or addicted to prescribed opioids, no matter how you're getting them, you're 40 times likely to be on heroin or end up on heroin. Very high risk. Now, look at multiple drug use and overdose deaths. Alcohol was involved. There we go. Alcohol was involved 12 to 22% of the time in all drug overdose deaths that contain these items. Combinations of opiates, benzodiazepines, and cocaine. 1 in 5 drug overdose deaths that involve heroin also involve cocaine. Alprazolam, certainly Xanax, 26% of drug overdose deaths with hydrocodone, 23% with oxycodone, 18% of the deaths involving methadone. And nearly 20% of overdose deaths that involve methamphetamine also involve heroin. So we're rarely talking about a single drug use. I mentioned earlier that the stimulants were on the rise. I'll throw this in there because this is going to be a very predominant problem. There's waves of stimulant addiction and then sedative addiction. Right, we're in a sedative cycle right now. It's alcohol, opiates, benzos. Stimulants are on the rise. Some people come in on this. Freud report had a paper. Sigmund Freud had a paper about how well cocaine worked to get rid of the opium habit. Turns out, a little extra data, another year or so, they figured out cocaine had some problems. But I see this all the time. Someone has decided they're going to quit their heroin habit. Right? They're going to quit, and they come in. They're in withdrawal from heroin, but they're cocaine positive because why? Well, I use the cocaine because it helps relieve some of my symptoms. It doesn't make a when you look at the neurobiology of that, why does that happen? But in fact, cocaine boosts your dopamine enough to make you feel somewhat better, even if you're withdrawing from opiates. So we see this stimulant use that's on the rise. We got the yellow is cocaine. This is a Florida medical examiner's report. These are the deaths related to cocaine. The gray are methamphetamines. The orange is amphetamines, and then cathinones. Cathinones are bath salts, primarily acting as a severe stimulant. Florida deaths, so we talked about that. In the last 2017 calendar year, 8.5% increase. Fentanyl and heroin are the driving force, and heroin is metabolized to morphine, so if you see a death related to morphine, it almost certainly was really heroin. And then this high potency mixing of fentanyl with all kinds of street drugs is driving our overdose deaths. Now, let's talk about addiction a bit. I don't know if any of you have read the book by Dr. Mate. It's In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. He said 3 factors need to coincide for substance addiction to occur. You need a susceptible organism, and in this case, the human brain is what we're talking about. You also need a drug with an addictive potential. We're talking about opioids today, but we could put anything in there of any of the drugs that could cause complete overdose. And then you need stress. And all 3 of these together seem to be the factors that lead to addiction. Probably, when we talk, we're all concerned that if you have young kids and you have teenagers, we're always concerned about substance use and experimentation. The vast majority of people don't have an addiction from that. I'm not encouraging their use. It's just that most people don't. But when you put all these factors together, a susceptible brain, an addictive substance, and a lot of stress, then you have a recipe for disaster. Well, the American Society of Addiction Medicine has this formal definition. This is actually the short form. We put the whole thing up there to take 3 or 4 slides. But the short form of what is the definition of addiction is it's a primary chronic disease of the brain reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry. It's a dysfunction in the circuits that leads to biological, psychological, social, and spiritual manifestations. This is reflected in an individual pathologically pursuing reward and or relief by substance use behaviors. That's the key term right here, pathologically pursuing that reward. A lot of use, a lot of experimentation with all kinds of drugs and alcohol, especially at a young age. But this definition of addiction, this term is very important, pathologically pursuing reward, even when it's causing damage. Now, Dr. McLean, Paul McLean, was a neuroscientist from the early 1990s. I think he died 15 years ago or so. But in the early 70s, Paul McLean published this paper. He talked about that the brain has sort of, they call it the triune brain. He was talking from an evolutionary standpoint, that we have a brain that sort of functions in like 3 levels. He called the lower brain the reptilian brain. It's the part of our brain that make sure we eat, right? You feed, you fight, you flight, and you mate. If you don't eat, if you don't have sex and reproduce, as a species, you're not going to be around very long. So they call that the reptilian brain, right? So the middle brain, what we call the limbic system, which was developed, certainly highly developed, the limbic and neocortex in all mammals and in humans, is that the limbic system of the brain was our centers of where motivation, emotion, learning, and memory were taking place. And then the neocortex is our executive function. It's our CEO, really, for the rest of our brain. Abstract thoughts, language, imagination, and reason, right? If you don't have an executive function, if you don't have a CEO, if you don't have an executive team that's sort of helping control making good decisions, the brain can sort of go haywire. If we got rid of the whole executive team at NCH and there was no leadership, it would sort of go haywire, right? Not for long. So again, that's sort of what these regions do. Now, if you have a teenager especially, read Dr. Gee, J. Gee's paper on the amazing teen brain. Actually, if you don't have a teenager, if you just want to know how kids' brains work, and yes, they do have a brain. And even in the teenage years, it's still there. But great work. Dr. Gee came out of the NIH and now at UC San Diego. Some amazing work about brain development. He even used his own children as they were growing up to do functional MRIs to studies. It's interesting, but I like this statement. Teenagers are more likely than children or adults to engage in risky behavior. Duh, right? No one doubts that. Why is that? Well, if you look at our limbic brain, its maturation is pretty fully developed by the time you start puberty. This is your go brain. It's telling you what to do. You can do everything, right? Your prefrontal cortex is not really fully developed. Now, these are averages, of course. It's not fully developed until you're about 25. There's a huge gap in there, right? About a decade between when your brain here is developed and says, do everything, and your prefrontal cortex is trying to say, well, wait a minute, it's the stop side of the brain, reasoning, developing. And what's going on there? Well, actually, the blue is the amount of volume of the neocortex. The blue is the lower end. The red, the redder and oranger and yellow numbers are higher volume. This is 5 years old. This is 20 years old. You say, well, that didn't make any sense. You mean I'm losing neocortex volume from childhood? Now, by the time I'm an adult making good decisions, You've actually lost neocortical volume by anywhere from about 3 to 5% by the time you're in your early 20s. So what's going on? We're far better off, aren't we? Why aren't we losing brain? Well, you're not really losing overall brain mass. What you're losing, what's happening here is neural pruning. The pathways that are being developed that you're going to do, how you do things well. If you look at those pathways that are being developed, this is in the stride between the communication between the limbic system and the upper brain, the higher cortical brain. Those pathways are being made more efficient. What you're good at is being better. What you're exposed to, what you're not good at, may be pruned away. It's the language development is a classic one. You see children that have learned languages from all the way up, and they can speak all kinds of languages, even learning new languages is amazing. Those of us who don't have multiple language abilities, the chance of picking that up in a really substantial way once you're a full grown adult is not very good. Because those pathways have already been determined. Now, this happens to be me. I hear a few laughs, that's okay. I laugh at this too. So, I'm 13. And I'm going to be the best basketball player in the world. As a matter of fact, my limbic brain has told me that. Now, it didn't tell me that I was 4'8", weighed 75 pounds. When some of my classmates were already shaving. The smallest jersey they had was this one. If you look really closely, there's safety pins pulling these shoulder things up so that this shirt wouldn't be down here at my waist. I still thought I was probably going to be the best basketball player in the world, except I was pretty decent at studies and academics. As a matter of fact, one time, my basketball practice was scheduled the same time that I was on the academic team. And it was scheduled at the same time. And there's a little conflict there in my academic team. Really, a guy, highly respected, even to this day. He said, actually they call me Sammy. He said, maybe we should focus on academics. He could see that, right? I couldn't see that. Teenagers at 13, you're going to be the best basketball player there ever was. I didn't. Obviously. Thanks for the signal. I told him to give me a signal around 15. So we're going to speed up here because there's some slides that they're going to be. If you want the handout, get the handout. There's going to be some slides of data. I want to get to the end, but I'm going to cover everything very, very closely here. So this is sort of the accepted model that comes out of NIDA now, National Institute of Drug Abuse, about what's going on in the human brain in the areas of salience, what's called incentive salience, reward deficits, stress surface, and executive function deficits. Wow, that's all of that. I studied, actually my board's for prediction comes up here in 2 months, so I did study this a great deal. But incentive salience is what takes importance. When you take an intoxicant, anything that has psychoactive effects, what takes importance? Now, and then when your brain doesn't have that, what's the withdrawal symptom? When you have no reward, and what about stress surface, stress overload? What happens in that situation And if your executive function from your prefrontal cortex is either not well developed or it's being altered by substance use, then all of a sudden you have a cycle set up for detriment. Now, just look early. Let's go back to the 90s to some studies. What happens with dopamine levels? That's our primary reward neurotransmitter, dopamine. What happens? Well, with eating, you go about 150% above your baseline. Sex is about 200%. This study is not still open. You cannot sign up. This was in laboratory rats. What happens with drug use in the brain with dopamine levels? Now, if you look at, again, these are, there's lots of different forms of opiates. This took morphine at the time. It goes up over 200%. Nicotine, so from smoking, goes up about 220%. Cocaine will drive your dopamine up over 300%. What does amphetamines do? This was a measure at the nucleus accumbens in the rats. Amphetamines, nearly 1,000% increase in your dopamine level. We talk about incentive salience. When a drug takes precedence over anything else that can cause that much reward and temporary reward, boy, the stimulants do it big time. And the opiates do it big time too, but all of a sudden you say, well, you just stop. There's lots of other rewarding things in life. Read a book, go sit in the car, swim in the ocean. Sorry, the dopamine levels don't get that high with doing that activity. Nothing takes the place of the drug at that point. Wow, I know we're limited on time, so I want to. These are in the handout. This is on my corkboard in my office because I look at this every day. I won't go into the details, but choice. Somebody says, I hear this often. Just stop. We have a pregnant woman sitting in front of you, pregnant with a child now that she's responsible for, and her friends and her parents say, just stop using. Now it's more than about you. You have a baby. You just need to quit. I heard this. I heard it from a parent last week sitting with their adult son in the office who said, I don't understand. He knows that he's going to die from this, and he just doesn't want to quit. And he does want to quit. It's all, when we talk about choice, boy, choice is not an easy thing. There's a lot of factors that drive the choice issue. Okay? Once you have drug use on board and a lot of the impaired cognition and tolerance and withdrawal and this hijacked brain, all of a sudden this deal of you just need to stop, you really can't just stop. That's a very, very complex thing to say, just a matter of choice. Well, medication-assisted treatment, there's going to be studies in here. I won't have time today to go into the details. They're in there. Medication-assisted treatment is the use of medicine with counseling and behavioral therapies. Okay? As we say, addiction didn't start with a pill and it won't end with one. But we do use medication-assisted treatment to help us to get into a phase that someone can be actively involved in recovery. Now, our medication-assisted treatments for opioids include methadone, buprenorphine, and naltrexone. These are the brand names of each of these. Methadone is only prescribed under highly restricted federal licensure and OTP programs. That's not office-based. Buprenorphine isn't office-based, but you have what's called a data waiver as a licensed physician, and nurse practitioner, PA, to prescribe. Suboxone, there's now an implantable version. It's pellets. You put on 4 pellets the last 6 months. And then there's an injectable monthly now that just came out last year, so does Kate. Naltrexone has a pill. Naltrexone pills have been out a long time for use in alcohol and for opioids. The injectable version is called Vivitrol. Someone has to have an opioid. If you send someone to me, they have to officially have an opioid use disorder before I can treat them at that point. Now, if someone's on prescription opioids, and obviously if they stop them, or they develop tolerance, then if they stop the pills, they're going to have withdrawal, they're going to crave. That doesn't make you having opioid use disorder. So if you're under a chronic pain management, you may not have an opioid use disorder. A lot of the symptoms that we go by in the DSM-5 criteria, it's about persistent use in hazardous situations, negative outcomes. You're buying on the street. You're doing a lot of things to make you're pathologically pursuing the substance. Skip this. I'll only use this slide again for sake of time to say that if you look at the buprenorphine, methadone, naltrexone activity levels, methadone is a full agonist. You can die from methadone. You can overdose on methadone. Somewhere about right here is full respiratory depression. Well, actually, it's higher respiratory depression. So you'll stop breathing if you take enough methadone. Methadone is only good because it's a once-a-day monitored dosing with behavioral therapy to get someone off other drug use. It's very unsafe. Methadone works, but also high risk. Buprenorphine never reaches the point of full respiratory depression, so you don't overdose on Suboxone and buprenorphine. Naltrexone is a complete blocker or on that receptor. Got some beautiful slides that I will not spend any time on, but if you want a copy of the handout, that talks a lot about how the full agonists act on the receptors and the associated symptoms. Let's see, methadone is a full agonist, has the same effects on the mu receptor. Buprenorphine, however, has very minimal effect, a partial agonist, doesn't cause full respiratory depression. Very safe, and especially when used in a program that tries to address other issues with addiction. Naltrexone doesn't have any of those effects, it just blocks the receptors. But it's another story, it's another big talk. I'm not going to go into the details. There's a set of 3 or 4 slides here that talk about the early studies about buprenorphine. This one that only randomized 40 patients. 20 got detoxed and then placed on placebo. The other 20 got maintained on buprenorphine. At the end of 1 year, 4 of those 20 were dead. None of the patients in the buprenorphine study died. These other studies, this one in British Medical Journal last year, and this one, which was in Annals of Internal Medicine just 2 months ago, basically looked at large cohort studies that were showing significant, definite changes in reduction of all-cause mortality and opiate overdose mortality when a person is on treatment. This was comparing methadone and buprenorphine. Both worked well. Naltrexone actually didn't have any data. They had such a low number that they couldn't correlate the data. Only 1/3 of patients, this was after non-fatal, these are the highest risk people. 5 to 10% of these people will be dead within a year. If you overdose, show up in the ER, get revived, you're discharged, even if you spend time in a few days of detox. Very high death rate. But even in that situation, only 1/3 of the people got on any medication-assisted treatment, even though it's been well proven to help. The reason for that, the treatment gap, you have a chronic disease, diabetes, hypertension, even major depression, nearly 3/4 will get treatment. When it comes to addiction, only about 10% people with a true substance use disorder actually get treatment. What are those barriers? Negative attitudes at all levels, from families to clinics to pharmacies to churches to just about any organization. A misunderstanding about the disease itself, or that it is a disease, as some people would say. Access to care due to regulatory issues. Cost. I'll just run through these again. I want to get to the end. How much time have I got? 5 minutes. What's the elephant in the room when it comes to seeking care for addiction? The elephant in the room is stigma, by far. Because almost anyone who finally decided to get treatment, or those who decided not to, stigma is such a big thing. What is stigma, really? It's a blemish, right? It's a blemish on your reputation. It's a stain on your reputation, maybe even on your whole family. Even if it's to talk about, sometimes it's a blemish. And this elephant in the room has caused a lot of destruction. Actually, Brenda Eiliff, who's the executive director over at Hazelden Betty Ford here in Naples, she wrote a book about a decade ago now. It's called Women's Guide to Recovery. She said, addiction is very messy. It's like a hurricane that leaves nothing in its path unscathed. And that's when it comes to families. And it could be the workplace, could be various things, but addiction leaves nothing unscathed in its pathway. Even among us, even among the residents. Among residents, studies among resident physicians, about a third will have clinical depression and never seek care because you sort of feel a little guilty, you feel a little shameful about seeking care. And nearly about 13% of male physicians will have alcohol use-related problems, and sometimes some studies will say nearly 20% of female physicians will have either alcohol misuse or, and it's often due to the stigma that we don't want to talk about. I could spend a long time. Actually, I use this little diagram in another talk I've given on social determinants of health. It has so much to offer about a tree that's in bad soil compared to a tree that's in good soil, and that you still have manifestations of multiple things in your community. substance abuse, smoking, mortality, obesity, depression, heart disease. And a lot of it depends on what's underneath in the community, right? Because no matter what resources how well your community does, and all the social investment in your community, is that you will still have these things. But the able to deal with them and the degree of effect within your region, your community, can be greatly diminished when you have quality schools, access to healthy foods, health care, housing, health insurance. All these things lead to a healthy community, right? So this is something I could spend a long time talking about at different levels, but I won't. I won't spend time on this. It's in the handout because I know we're short on time. If you get this book, Facing Addiction in America, it's free. You get a PDF online. It's published by the Surgeon General in 2016. You can get a free copy mailed to you. You've already paid for it. You're taxpayers. You've already paid for it. It's an excellent document, very comprehensive, about 450 pages, about all things related to addiction in America and how we deal with it as a country. Sorry, I couldn't cover it all in detail, but that's all I have, and I thank you for your attention today.
Thank you very much. I want to say you look a bit like Pistol Pete Maris. Are there any questions from the North Campus? So we'll open it up here then. Any questions here?
I'm available up front too afterward if you
I have one question. How, if this detoxification and discharge is unsuccessful and pretty much the death sentence from what you're telling us, what do we do here in this institution